Right. Marc Parent is here. Welcome.
Thank you. Good
to
to be
our
here.
offices. This means we get to talk about airplanes, aviation, flight simulators, all the good fun stuff.
All my favorite subjects.
So CAE is really two businesses. You've got a civil aviation side and the defense and security side. And so maybe for the audience who aren't as familiar with the company, maybe you could kind of give an overview and also a bit of an outlook for growth for each of those.
Sure. Well, let me talk about that. I mean, not to correct you, but the way we see it is that we have one business. I mean, we train pilots. We sell simulators. We're number one in the world at selling simulators for the world's airlines. We train pilots both on the airline side, and business jet side, on the defense side. And those are really the two go-to-markets. What you were referring to businesses. We sell in civil, which is about 60%, give or take, of our revenue of our business. About 40% is defense. But in both cases, we're training pilots. We're training them in simulators. We train them in aircraft as well, especially on the defense sector. Headquarters Montreal, but we're at 40 locations around the world. Actually, 90% of what we do is exported. You know, kind of basically just talking about, you know, in terms of our market position. I think the way I like to illustrate it is, and I'm very, very proud of that as a Canadian, is that anywhere you fly in the world, if you take an airline flight, and there's about, you know, give or take 100,000 airline flights every single day around the world, very good chances that the pilots flying your aircraft have been trained in one of our simulators built in Montreal or one of our 70 training centers around the world. And when you think about defense, I'll just give you one data point. All 43,000 pilots in the U.S. military, all branches, are at some point in their career trained by CAE. So that just gives you a sense of the scale that we have in the world of pilot training.
Now we've seen it's been a really interesting and busy year in the sector. We've seen Boeing has had, you know, all manner of challenges. We've seen airlines in some cases pulling back, responding to different changes in consumer demand. In other cases, expanding. Maybe start by giving us your perspective on how you think about those challenges, and you know how does it impact your view, particularly of the civil side of the business, over the medium term? Yeah, well, look, I think there's some temporary supply really challenges in the industry now, and really I see them as short term. You talked about it. I mean, Boeing has had, you know, their issues in terms of delivery of aircraft, but you know they're going to get over it. I know the CEO very well, and then you know they have good people at the helm, and you know they're a great company. They get through it, and they have a huge backlog. I mean, Boeing and Airbus have over 10-year backlogs of aircraft, and that's just fueled by the demand for passenger traffic. I mean, historically, civil aviation, people traveling in aircraft, airlines, basically revenue passenger kilometers, any metric you'll take, it grows by about typically 4 or 5% annually. That's been the growth rate / 20, 30 years, and it will be the growth rate years to come. And I think we have some catch up because typically it's in lockstep with GDP growth. And GDP has grown, you know, substantially more since 2019 and the onset of the pandemic. And civil aviation has the ways to catch up to that trend line right now. And if you wonder where's that growth going to come from, I'll just give you just a couple of statistics. I mean, Boeing themselves, you talk about them, they predict that the number of civil airliners in the world will double in the next 20 years. And that means a lot of pilots. That means a lot of pilots. Just ourselves in our forecast for the industry of number of pilots are going to have to be created in the next 10 years just to support retirements and the rate of growth I just talked about. You're talking about 284,000 new pilots are going to have to be created. And half of those haven't even started their training today. And final statistic, you wonder where's that going to come from? It's going to come from the growth that I talked about, 4.5% on a global stage. But let me just give you just one statistic to illustrate the point. If you take India, for example, 1.3 billion people, there's about 50 wide-body aircraft in India today. In Singapore, not the same population, obviously, there's over 260 wide-body aircraft.
So just think about that. So we're seeing across the world substantial growth, and in regions like India, in China, and the Far East in general, I mean, the middle class is growing. There's more availability of capital to be able to travel. The airlines themselves are lowering the cost of airfare, and there is no competing infrastructure. That's what's driving growth. So look, we have, going back to your original question, there's some temporary, what I firmly believe, temporary challenges to the supply of aircraft. It's not demand. If you go to airports, they're full. If you try to get on an airplane, they're full. We see it. The airlines that themselves, are basically scrambling to get the airplanes right now. But I think that's a temporary, issue on the market itself.
70 training centers around the world. What are the parts of the market or the regions of the world where you would like to have a bigger presence, and how do you plan to go about it?
Well, we are where our customers need us to be, and that's really around the world. And it depends on which market. In business aircraft, let's talk about our business. If I take civil, about the training we do, it's about half airline pilot training, about half business aircraft training. If you take that half of business aircraft training, a lot of it's in the United States. That's the biggest amount. That's the biggest amount of aircraft that there is out there for traveling in business aircraft. So you tend to have a lot of training centers in the United States, but followed very closely by Europe and places like Dubai, the Far East, the Middle East. That's where the market is. In terms of airlines, well, airline is really global. And so basically you will find our training centers around the world pretty much in every major metropolis where you will have airplanes. You'll find a CAE training center. Chances are, if you're at an airport, pretty much anywhere in the world, if you glance around, you'll probably see a CAE sign, and that's a training center, because training pilots you do it locally. If airlines, and I think it's very important to understand our business, to understand the fact that what we do is a recurring business. It's one of those, I think, probably the only job where every 6 months you have to go back into the simulator. I'm a pilot myself, and the first time that you fly in the real aircraft is with passengers in the back. Now think about that, reflect on that a second. All of your training is done on the simulator. All of my training, I mean, you're a pilot already, obviously, but all of the pilot training that I had to fly the jet that I fly was in the simulator. Consequently, first flight I had is literally with passengers in the back. Typically, the other person's not their first flight, but you get the point. And every 6 months, you have to go back into that simulator. So airlines around the world have got to have the infrastructure. They either have their own infrastructure of simulators to train your pilots, or, and which is a growing business for us, they'll outsource that training to us. Just like, you've outsourced any services in the industry. Think about IT outsourcing. I kind of make akin our business to that. Convincing airlines around the world to outsource their training to us, and we've been very successful at it. And we've really ourselves created the only global third-party alternative to conduct that training yourself. And so, ergo, where our customers need us to be, and that is around the world.
What's the acquisition pipeline look like in your industry? Are there things for you to buy?
Well, I'd start by saying that we don't need to acquire anything ourselves. Our growth plan is very much organic growth, and that's keeping lockstep with our customers. As I mentioned, if I think about simulator sales, we're number one in the world. We have a very high market share. We're essential to the world's airlines, and if you look at the driver of sales that way, it's essentially delivery of aircraft by Boeing and Airbus. Probably every 30 narrow-body aircraft requires a simulator in the market. And they tend to deliver about 60 aircraft a month, on either side of just narrow-body aircraft. Then you have wide-body aircraft. That gives you an idea of what we will get in terms of selling simulators out there in the market, and that is basically actually negative capital, because we get advanced payments for the product that we sell. In the training business, again, it's a recurring business. As I mentioned, we have 300 odd simulators out there around the world in our 70 training centers. And we will add simulators, and that's the organic side of things, the CapEx, to grow with our customers. As they grow their fleet of aircraft, we will add, to that capacity. And incrementally, and that's the other side of acquisitions, if there's an opportunity, consolidate, do a JV or something with an airline to, again, get them to outsource their training, we will do that. On the defense side, it tends to be organic itself, and in terms of JVs with original equipment manufacturers, like, I'll give you an example. I was in Sardinia 2 weeks ago. We have a joint venture there with Leonardo. Leonardo is considered like the Boeing of Italy, for example, Airbus of Italy. We have a joint venture there with them where we train fighter pilots for literally 13 nations out there. And we own fighter aircraft trainers. We have simulators. We have a whole training environment there. And actually, these pilots there, and that's really an organic play with some contribution of airplanes to support the growth of the operation. And there, we're training pilots. We had I was interviewing some pilots there from the Japanese Air Force. They're training with us. I mean, if you look at these pilots, they're kids, really. They're going straight from our training directly into flying F-35s. And they're completing their training in January. And you think about the kind of missions that they'll be flying, and they're going to be flying combat air patrols around Japan, around Taiwan. So it brings home the essential nature of what we do, the essential training that we do.
Let's talk. How do you finance growth? Maybe a capital question here. As you embark on this journey of 5 or 10 years, getting much bigger. Mm-hmm. How do you intend to finance it? And any thought about the dividend that you suspended at the beginning of the pandemic and has not yet been reinstated?
Well, look, I start by saying our business is very cash generative. So, as I mentioned, our growth plan, we're going to grow with growth in our industry, and we'll grow beyond this because we have more opportunity either with market share gains in both of our markets, and again through potentially more joint ventures or more acquisitions of airlines. But we tend to be able to internally finance our growth, and that's our plan. In terms of the dividend, look, it's an ongoing conversation that we have with the board of directors. Our focus has been to deleverage, and we're still on that path. We deleveraged. We reached the deleveraging targets that we set in the past year. We'll continue to do so. So, look, I think that's a conversation that's going to continue to be active. We did some share buyback in the past period of time, and so that's really where we stand at the moment.
At the beginning of this conversation, you talked about the longer range outlook for growth being connected to global GDP. I suppose one of the counter arguments about that rate of growth is climate and the effect of aviation on the climate, on emissions as a relatively high emitting industry. Is CAE doing anything to try to mitigate that, to kind of help the social license part of the aviation sector? Well,
absolutely. Look, I would just start by saying that there's nothing more ecological than training in a simulator. and why do I say that? Because there's still opportunity to grow the amount of training that's done synthetically through simulators, and a lot of that's in the military. The military, I was in Alabama just last week, where we train all. I talked about how many pilots we do in the U.S. military. So we train all the U.S. Army fixed wing and vertical rotary wing pilots in Alabama every year. And although we have a huge infrastructure there in terms of simulators actually flying real helicopters, still only about 50% of the training is done in simulators in that military operation. So room to grow there, so continuous dialogue there. Ourselves specifically, I mean, we're known for simulators, obviously, but less known is we're actually the top world producer of pilots for themselves, with contracts with airlines around the world to take a person off the street and make them an airline pilot. And for that, we use a lot of airplanes. So we ourselves are converting our airplanes. We're doing the STC, the supplemental type certificate ourselves to basically transform our fleet of aircraft that we have to electric power. So we're doing that. And if I go back to aviation, I mean, in terms of the amount of people, using airplanes every year, about half, or actually 2/3 of the world's population travels, in terms of numbers in aggregate, not the number of people, just the aggregate number of hours every year travel by aircraft. So it's an essential component of, the global economy. And that's not going to change. What is going to change is what the airlines are doing, and the whole the industry is doing. I don't think there's an industry that's doing more to achieve their climate growth. A lot of it has to do with sustainable aviation fuels, and that's a very strong driver. And of course, transforming the fleet of aircraft that are out there to engines that produce a lot less, or at least a lot less fuel burn, better fuel economy, which of course has profit potential in there, and of course the number one reason is ESG reasons.
Given the defense side of the business, is war good for your business?
Nobody's gonna be happy about geopolitical issues around the world, and to be if you've lived through the Cold War, a lot of us have. To me, you have to believe that making sure that our men and women are in uniform, are ready, have a high level of readiness to ensure deterrence. That is very important, and we're at the epicenter of that to make sure that we believe it is our noble mission in defense, to make sure that men and women in uniform are ready to be able to accomplish their missions and return home safely. But again, nobody's going to be happy with geopolitical issues around the world.
All right, I guess we've got time for one more question, which looks into the future. What do you think is the most important or potentially most transformative technological shift that you're going to see in your sector coming forward?
Well, I think it's the same as everybody. I think it's AI. There's no doubt about it. For us, what we are doing, what we're using technology for, and we're number one in the world at technology for flight training, as what you would expect. So what we are doing is using technology, AI being a big one, to be able to make sure that the pilots that are flying today, that are going to be generated, these 284,000 pilots that we're going to generate our next, basically 10 years, how are we going to give them the experience to be able to know they can fly and maintain the safety record that they have? And for that, we're using technology like AI to give us objective data assessment of the skills of those pilots.
We have to wrap it up there. Marc Parent, thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.